local lodge in Crawley, with his white gloves and his apron, shaking hands with his friends, to pictures of him in little round mud huts in Nigeria, in Mosogar, shaking hands with the tribal chiefs with big bundles of money in his hand.
Really?
And the chiefs have all got bowler hats on, and kind of English canes and stuff.
Right,
Looks like he's brought over a load of contraband for them or something.
Huh.
So I had this kind of mythological setting of my grandfather from my mother and my grandmother, which, you can understand, because they didn't really see much of it or know about much of it apart from what he told them.
Yeah.
Over the years I realised that he may have been doing this philanthropic work, but at the same time he was exercising the power of the state, in the final sort of handover period where the British Empire had moved out. They were moving their corporations in.
So
he was a major part of this in the area.
Yeah. And when you discovered this, I don't know at the time if you were, interested, so to speak, in the more conspiratorial worldview at that point. But did your image of him kind of shatter at that point, or did you think even more, that this is really a great man? He's done wonderful things for the British Empire. What did you think about it?
Oh no, I was into the conspiratorial side of things, and I didn't really have any knowledge of Freemasonry or any of these things. But I was very political, and I was always very motivated by truth, and honesty,
right,
and love for the people. And the state, whether it be the royals or a government, is always the complete opposite of that. And I understood that from a very young age. I was taught that by my parents. This completely shattered my whole image of him. And it was from that point onwards that I realised the work that he was doing, and living this double life, that my fundamental interest in Freemasonry started. Because he was the Grand Master of his lodge in Crawley. And so that was my primary thing, was an actual personal connection of my grandfather and some of the things which I'd seen had been in operation, but I obviously understood that they weren't all of his own making.
Yeah.
That he was being ordered. So, this was about the age of 16 or 15, I kind of realised that there was a lot more going on behind the scenes with these fraternities and chivalric orders and secret societies.
Yeah.
In connection with business and state affairs,
Fascinating. So it's really what we're getting here, so to speak, is really an inside story of how the acquisition, as it were, of some of the resources are being gained, basically.
Absolutely.
Fascinating. So what happened after this point? Did you continuing researching Freemasonry and how, as you mentioned, of course, that he was inducted into the Order of the Bath, and that the name there itself, of course, is a very interesting reference to the city of Bath. But maybe we shouldn't go there yet. Do you want to share some more in regards to your grandpa?
Well, I guess there's one other aspect of the story which I find absolutely fascinating, and it's kind of like the mythological aspect in a spiritual sense. Because what he told my grandmother was that when he'd come back to Mosogar in Nigeria, just before contracting malaria, that for about a year and a half before this point, he'd been getting cursed by the local shaman. So everybody in the tribe seemed to really like my granddad on a surface kind of exoteric level, but this shaman or this witch doctor, whatever you'd like to call him, really didn't like him. And whenever he saw him, he'd always do these little kind of dances and gestures and other things and speak to him in his native tongue. And my grandfather would always ask the locals, what's he saying? And they said, he's cursing you.
Oops.
So, he had this sort of ongoing rivalry with the shaman of this tribe.
Right.
And, he told my grandmother that just before he, when he had got back to Nigeria, just before contracting the malaria, that he'd had a very strange dream. As he was coming back to Nigeria, he used to have an escort from the tribe who would meet him from the plane and would sleep in his room with him and guard him at all times, and make sure in the night all doors and windows were shut and everything like this. It was a very old custom, and so the guy took it very seriously. The guy often wouldn't sleep for sort of 20 hours and things. And so this dream that my grandfather had, he said it was a very surreal dream, where he kind of lazily opened his eyes and he was underneath a mosquito net in this hotel room, and he saw a huge spider sitting in the tree outside the window. And he said that this wasn't a normal spider. He said it was kind of like half a meter across, a huge kind of thing.
Yeah.
And he said he kind of blinked his eyes and closed his eyes for a second, opened them again, and this spider was then inside the window on the floor. And the window was closed. He said he kind of did the same again, drifted off again, and woke up again, and this spider was underneath the mosquito net and actually sitting on top of his chest.
Sheesh, okay.
So this was the last part of this very surreal dream that he remembered and recounted to my grandmother. And at this point, he actually had the malaria, and he was telling her this story in Crawley. And my grandmother still assures to me that he told her this story so many times and was so much in belief of it that she felt that it had something to do with it. Whether it was something which he'd believed so much and had felt guilt over some of his actions that it kind of afflicted him, or whether this was something actual supernatural that had actually occurred here. But yeah, that was one aspect which always fascinated me, and of course the whole role of karma, kind of coming back, how he lived this double life just before he got his payout for it. He's afflicted with malaria, gets a blood clot, which then travels to his brain and kills him instantly. He had the malaria for 2 or 3 months, but one day the blood clot just went straight to his brain and he was dead within a few seconds. And so, it's almost very much in keeping with his own karma that he provided for himself. So yeah, that was one aspect of it which always fascinated me.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, do you think obviously the shaman at this point were up to speed with what was going on? Do you think that he knew that he was trying to infiltrate, so to speak, within this community and gain the trust of the local tribe there?
I mean, I'd say from having looked into the whole kind of African ins and outs over the last sort of 300 years, not really connected to my grandfather, but predominantly the shamans or the wise men of the village absolutely understood what was happening, and they understood it on a multitude of levels because they were realized multi-dimensional beings, who did think about things on a very holistic level and were very intuitive. And so even if they didn't completely know the full story, even if they hadn't come into encounterment with these various Western groups, they could feel intuitively, I think, what was happening in front of them.
Fascinating, definitely. So there we have some background. I mean, do you know if this extends further back in your family beyond your grandpa? I mean, it seems to be, at least right now, that in many cases this is something that travels throughout the family lines. And I mean, do you know if your dad or even on your mom's side then some other people have been involved in these kinds of a close relationship, as it were, with the British monarchy?
No, it doesn't seem so at all. I mean, my mother, as I said, she was kind of this very lefty Christian.
Right.
So she always was kind of very wary of Freemasonry because she understood it as a kind of very paternal, very nationalized form of ritual and ceremony and religion.
Yeah.
So she was very wary of it. And so from my dad's side, obviously he wasn't connected to my grandfather. And there doesn't seem to be anything on his side of the family. But obviously my grandfather's father, and going back before him, it was successive for about 3 generations, as far as we know.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And from what I've understand so far, because of your grandpa's involvement with all of this, you have actually yourself been able to gain access to some material and even got entrance, so to speak, into looking at some of the libraries and materials in relation to the orders in Bath. Isn't that right?
Yeah, absolutely. While I was doing research for the book, I was actually helping the curator of Bath Tower Museum, a young lady named Amy Frost. She was doing a book on John Wood, one of the kind of prominent architects that built up the Georgian city in the later periods. And so some of my research was used by her. And through her, I met some of the other curators of the museums and other people involved with heritage societies and the councils. And through talking with some of these people, I actually got round to somebody telling me that I should go to the Bath Masonic Hall in Orchard Street. It was located. And obviously, I mean, there's always, whichever town that you go to, if you can gain entrance to the Masonic Hall and go and look at some of their books, their literature, their pictures, some of their artifacts and antiques, you will find out a huge amount about that town's kind of heritage.
Interesting.
And so I called them, first of all. I called the Grand Master of the Bath Orchard Street Lodge. I was a bit wary of it at first.
Right.
But I actually kind of plucked up the courage to give him a call.
Yeah.
And so I spoke to him, and he explained that the lodge was actually closed at that time. They have an open part of the year and a closed part.
Yeah.
So he actually arranged with the caretaker who was looking after the hall for him to come down and come and show me around.
Yeah.
But this was only after a second conversation. In the first conversation, he was very wary of me and kind of didn't want to talk to me. But
really?
I gave him my grandfather's name and the lodge and his lodge number. So I knew that there was kind of this unspoken rule that if your father or grandfather or one of your male line had been a Mason, it automatically entitles you to at least ask to be a member. It doesn't mean you will be a member.
Sure.
It automatically entitles you to ask. So by giving the detail of my grandfather, I think that it kind of opened him up a little bit. And he also said that one of the guys in the lodge knew my grandfather. Because he'd been a member of the same lodge in Crawley in Surrey. And so, I met the Grand Master and the caretaker, and they took me around the Bath Orchard Street Lodge.
Interesting. So, I mean, did the guys try to recruit you or anything?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
They did?
Yeah, well, first of all, they kind of checked. They kind of gave me their third-degree handshake, you know.
Right.
Just to see if I'd sort of tell them I was an apprentice or whatever.
Yeah.
And that didn't happen. And, eventually they said, would you like to join? And I must have been squirming in front of them because I didn't want to be too honest with my views upon Freemasonry.
Right.
But I wanted to give them a relatively honest answer.
Sure.
So I kind of just related to them that I don't feel that I need an intermediary of any sort. That I have my own centre and my own grounding. And to give up to somebody else is like giving up my own thinking to somebody else. And they were very, very respectful of it, actually, because I think, in a way, a part of them had wished they hadn't joined too.
Really?
The kind of look in their eyes when I was talking to them.
Really?
They kind of felt a bit attacked, in a way. You could see the look on the face. But yeah, they were quite respectful of it. And